I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents.
Life at the mall in a way you probably never imagined.
It's been more than a passing glance. When people stop, they stop and they spend some time there.
And adoption sets the stage for a meeting 40 years in the making.
Plus, it's not just about the animals. A Brooklyn author shows us another side of St. Francis of Assisi.
It's very hard for us to imagine Francis decked out like a knight with a lance or a sword in his hands.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us this Thursday. It is also the first day of October and the kickoff of Respect Life Month. Cardinal Justin Regali, who heads the U.S. Bishops' Conference pro-life efforts, has released a statement in which he is critical of those who advocate population control as a way to combat climate change.
That's right, and in that statement, he also reiterated the church's opposition to federal funding of abortion as part of any health care reform. The statement came ahead of this weekend's Respect Life Sunday. Closer to home, though, there's an effort to educate people about life, and it's in a place you probably least expected.
A couple from New Jersey, Mike and Maureen Nuzzi from Atco, New Jersey, they had the idea that they wanted to educate the public about the humanness of the unborn child in the womb. And Mike is a fisherman, and he felt that go where the fish are, and that is basically like malls with the young people. So the Nuzzis negotiated with the Staten Island Mall, and they actually put the exhibit in the mall in a kiosk in the center hall on the first floor. And it shows the development of the baby in the womb from the 8th week to the 34th week.
The Right to Life cause is very near and dear to the Knights of Columbus. And we all had seen the gruesome videos of what an abortion is like. But when we saw this one, we said, wow, this is much more positive, much more uplifting. You could look at it all day. You could literally stand there and look at it all day and wonder about this life.
It's non-threatening, and it truly shows the developing baby, the toes developing, the fingers developing. And in the last slide of the presentation on the DVD, it actually shows the baby smiling. It's
been more than a passing glance. When people stop, they stop and they spend some time there.
The day after we put it in the Staten Island Mall, we received a call at our Pregnancy Resource Center, the Crossroad Foundation, and the girl said, I was contemplating aborting the child, but after seeing the DVD and reading the brochure, I decided to keep the child. So I was very, very impressed by that, and it really invigorated me to keep going and trying to keep it at the mall. To date, we have enough money to keep it going through October. And if you'd like to contribute, you could always make a donation and send it to Project Truth in care of the Crossroad Foundation, 15 Treadwell Avenue, Staten Island, New York, and that's 10302. If anybody would like to see the actual DVD, you could actually see it on the web. It's such a beautiful way of education.
And that is the Truth Booth at the Staten Island Mall. The booth is a program of the organization LifeWorks Ohio, and they have several booths in Ohio and also elsewhere in the country, like this one in Staten Island.
All right, well, great. And it's definitely, I like what the guy from the Knights of Columbus said. It's a more uplifting sort of thing. It's not, you know, the gruesome videos, like he said before, it's actually showing the development of the babies. So it's kind of a nice, different thing.
Very natural. It's what happens when a baby is growing in a womb.
Right, absolutely, that's it. Well, we've posted some more information about the Truth Booth, easy for me to say, online at our blog. Just head on over to currentsny.net, click on Riding the Wave.
But stay tuned, there's much more currents straight ahead. Coming up, recovery efforts continue following deadly earthquakes and storms in the South Pacific. We'll have that story.
And a Canadian bishop faces criminal charges. We'll have the shocking details.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Coming up a little bit later, it took 4 decades, 40 years, but a brother and sister meet for the very first time.
But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Well, an update now on the disasters in the South Pacific. The Philippines is bracing for a second typhoon after Ketsana left hundreds dead there just days ago. In Indonesia, meantime, UN humanitarian sources say at least 1,100 people have been confirmed dead after 2 earthquakes struck that region. In Samoa, 22 people were killed when tsunami waves swept ashore. The pastor of a Samoan church in California says his congregation has several hundred members who have relatives in the hardest hit areas.
It's overwhelming. I just don't know what to do. When things like this happen, it's very difficult.
Catholic Relief Services is among the groups providing disaster aid. We've provided some more information on how you can help on our website. Just go to currentsny.net and click on Riding the Wave. Some shocking news now from Canada. Just weeks after announcing a $15 million sexual abuse settlement, the Bishop of Nova Scotia is charged with child pornography. We get more now from Elizabeth Chu.
No one answered the door today at Bishop Raymond Lahi's home in Antigonish. He was the spiritual leader of this deeply Catholic community until he abruptly quit on Saturday, citing personal reasons. Now his neighbors are stunned that he's been charged with possessing and importing child pornography.
I'm shocked, really. I can't hardly believe it that he would do that after all that went on with the other priests, and that he turned around and do the same thing.
Lahi was in the spotlight just last month after he helped work out a $15 million settlement for victims of sexual abuse by Antigonish priests.
I want them to know how terribly sorry we are, how wrong this abuse was, and how we are now trying to right these past wrongs.
2 weeks ago, Lahi was on a trip home to Canada when border service agents at the Ottawa airport searched his laptop. Last week, he was charged. The Archbishop of Halifax says, in hindsight, it's obvious why Lahi resigned.
I didn't know what the nature of the resignation, what the reasons were. And so now I know what the reasons are.
Archbishop Mancini says some parishioners will leave the church. They were just asked to pay the settlement out of their local church's coffers. As for Mancini himself,
shocked, hurt, because it impacts on me as a leader who is trying to do my job. And so, honestly, part of my concern is there anyone left that we can believe?
Across the country, people are reeling.
I think it's terrible.
It does hurt, for sure.
Including in Lahi's home province, Newfoundland and Labrador.
It will stir up, in people, again, all of the history that has gone on in the past of the abuse.
Elizabeth Chu reporting there. Archbishop Anthony Mancini of Halifax, who was interviewed for that piece, will oversee the Diocese of Nova Scotia until a new bishop is named. The bishop there did turn himself in to authorities today. Well, abstinence-only education could be back soon. A Senate subcommittee voted to restore $50 million of funding for the program. The same committee also passed an alternate measure to fund education on contraception, sexually transmitted diseases, and other sexual health topics. The full Senate will vote on which of the two measures to adopt as part of a health care overhaul. Elsewhere on Capitol Hill, 183 members from both parties say they want to vote their consciences. They've sent a letter to Speaker Nancy Pelosi asking that she allow a vote on an amendment to ban federal funding of abortion.
A new Gallup poll shows more Americans are in favor of the government promoting traditional values. Last year, Americans were split down the middle on the issue at 48% each. But this year, 53% of those surveyed were for government promotion of traditional values, compared with 42% who think the government should be neutral on the issue. Gallup says the shift from a year ago is primarily from the political middle. From India now, the education minister there wants to partner with the Catholic Church in the country's new education policies. During an assembly in Delhi this week of the Conference of Religions India, which represents 125,000 Catholic brothers, priests, and nuns, the education minister praised Catholic education in helping the poor and the marginalized. There are about 14,500 Catholic schools in India, with over half in rural areas. Still, 88% of Indian children do not make it through the 12th grade. Fresh back from the Czech Republic, the Pope is planning yet another big trip. Pope Benedict the 16th will visit Cyprus next year, and he may use the trip as a chance to meet with the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. The Roman Catholic and Russian Orthodox churches have been split for 1,000 years, but Benedict has said uniting all Christians is one of his main priorities. And a new film about Our Lady of Fatima is coming soon to a theater near you. The movie, The 13th Day, chronicles the memoirs of Sister Lucia and the stories of thousands of eyewitnesses telling the story of the Virgin Mary's appearances to Lucia Santos and her cousins. In 1917, the Virgin Mary is said to have given prophecies and warnings to children, including a vision of hell, the spread of communism, and the Pope's attempted assassination. The film debuts in New York City on October 13th, the final day of the final apparition.
Well, it should be a nice, intriguing movie to see. There's more currents coming up straight ahead. Stay tuned.
Coming up, St. Francis of Assisi did more than just talk to animals. We'll tell you about his interfaith dialogue.
He went to Egypt during the Fifth Crusade and attempted to convert the Sultan of Egypt.
Welcome back to Currents. Well, this Sunday is not only Respect Life Sunday, it's also the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. Francis is probably best known as the patron saint of animals, and a lot of churches will actually be holding blessings of the animals coming up this weekend, and we'll be covering that. But you're about to see a side of Francis you probably didn't know about.
That's right. After coming from a rich family and fighting in the Fifth Crusade, Francis became a champion of peace. And he did something that would probably today be unheard of. To find out more, I spoke with a Brooklyn author whose latest book is about this. And we are here with Paul Moses. He is the author of the new book, The Saint and the Sultan, subtitled The Crusades, Islam, and St. Francis of Assisi's Mission of Peace. Welcome to Currents.
Thank you very much, Francesca.
Thanks for having, having your book and talking a little bit about it on our show. Tell us a little bit about this book and St. Francis and how perhaps it explores a side of him that we may not know about.
Well, I became intrigued by this not well-known incident in Francis' life where he went to Egypt during the Fifth Crusade and attempted to convert the Sultan of Egypt. To make the whole story short, I would say they hit it off. Mm-hmm. He didn't convert the Sultan, but I think that what happened between them maybe can be a useful model for us today in this time of tension between Christians and Muslims. So that's what brought me into this.
Brought you into it. Obviously a very bloody time. This is 800 years ago. Christians, Catholics were trying to, as you say, convert. What was it about that meeting that was so significant? What was it perhaps that was more of a message of peace as opposed to one of fighting that was dominating the landscape at the time?
Well, Francis took very literally what the gospel says about loving your enemy. And so he went at great risk to himself, unarmed. He didn't really know what the Sultan was like. The Sultan was actually very good to the Christians of Egypt. Mm-hmm. But Francis probably wouldn't have known that.
Sure.
Again, I think that it didn't change history, but looking back, there's something valuable there for us that maybe we can use today.
And bring that, please bring that full circle to where we are right now, because obviously there are still a lot of conflicts among the religions, and what can we learn from this incident?
Yeah. Well, one thing we learned is even from the Sultan, there's a tradition in Islam of respect for holy Christians, for holy Christian monks. It goes back to the earliest days of Islam. Muhammad had a respect for the monks that he knew, must have known in the desert. So there's that we can learn. That this tradition is still there, and I talked to some noted scholars of Islam who think it should be, noted and encouraged. And Francis, he, as you said, this was a very violent time, not only in terms of the Crusades, but even
in general.
Among Christians. There was tremendous violence in the cities of Italy that Francis grew up with. And Francis, again, took the gospel literally. He did not believe in violence.
But he wasn't always like that, correct? Wasn't he himself a soldier, and wasn't he held for a period of time and sort of then converted to more the softer, gentler form of Francis that we know now with the birds and the animals and everything?
That's very true. It's very hard for us to imagine Francis decked out like a knight with a lance or a sword in his hands. But he was the son of perhaps the wealthiest merchant in Assisi. And when it came time to go to war with Perugia, a war that was really all about greed and money, Francis was right out there, looking very dashing, and it was a horrible experience. The Assisians were massacred by the Perugians, who were a more powerful city, and Francis probably only survived because his father was wealthy enough to pay a good ransom.
Okay.
And then Francis was thrown in a prison, not like the kinds of prisons we have today, but just like a deep, dark hole in the ground where he was for a year. And this is an important part of what I've tried to do. I look at Francis as a traumatized veteran. I talked to some experts on military psychology from West Point and so forth, and they basically said, particularly one Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman said, he had to leave there a shattered man and filled with survivor guilt.
PTSD, all of those kinds of things, if we will, today almost.
I never got to the point of saying he met the clinical diagnosis. I actually talked to, psychiatrists at Walter Reed Hospital. There weren't enough facts to say that, but he was traumatized.
Yeah, for sure. And then used that to then become, as we said, more of this ambassador of peace.
I would say Francis saved himself through very deep prayer and contemplation, and adopted a lifestyle that would put him as far away from violence as possible. So if he had no money, if you have no money, you couldn't go to war. He wouldn't ride a horse. If you had no horse, you could never get in that situation again.
Yeah. And what inspired you to do this? Because you actually got a grant to go and travel to do primary research in the Far East in Egypt, correct?
Right. Well, I'm a professor at Brooklyn College, and they generously gave me a year off from teaching, a fellowship, to work on this book. And I did go to Egypt and to Italy, and that was mainly to kind of get the feel of the places, and also to talk to some of the people. When I went to Egypt, I was able to talk to the Franciscans who were still there. I was able to talk to the Papal Nuncio, who is very well known in the church as an expert on Islam, Archbishop Michael Fitzgerald.
To whom would this book appeal? Is it just for Catholics? Is it just for Muslims? Is it for historians? Is it for just anybody today?
I'm hoping it'll have a broad appeal, obviously, but I think people who are interested in the medieval period, first of all, so history, I think it's of special interest to Catholics. There's no question about that. But also, I think people who are looking at the problems that we have today and looking to maybe get behind them and go back earlier in time and maybe see what are some of the other paths that we can look to in history. So I'm aiming for a broad audience.
A broad audience. Yeah. And so what it's saying to us today is primarily what in your eyes?
Well, I think it's saying that there are these models in the past that can help us to achieve some kind of better relations. It's not all bad. And a lot of people look up to St. Francis.
Sure.
And I think we need to know what he was really like. He was really somebody who worked tirelessly throughout his ministry to make peace and to end violence.
Right.
And he was very aware of the social situation in which he lived. He didn't just you couldn't go on a blog in those days, right? You probably couldn't even speak out so well. They didn't have the traditions that we have for freedom of speech.
But he set the example.
Exactly. He did it through example, and I think going to the Sultan was his way of trying to give example to other Christians.
Very significant. All right, Paul Moses, author of The Saint and the Sultan, thank you so much for being here on Currents, and look forward to having it in bookstores very soon.
Thank you very much, Francesca. It's a pleasure.
Right, thank you. Well, very soon. It was released earlier this week. You can pick up The Saint and the Sultan in bookstores now. And he was such a pleasure to talk to. And what I liked the most about what he said was that, in fact, the Sultan was very receptive to Francis and treated him well and had a large respect for the Christians in Egypt at the time, and wasn't necessarily as perhaps violent as people might have thought.
Right, thought or imagined. And I mean, that it talked about that tradition that they had of being in the Muslim tradition of being, respectful of devout Christians as well. I mean, St. Francis of Assisi all decked out like a knight.
I know, that was before.
Right, that was before, this was after, but
and his other point is really, history may repeat itself, but like you said, it's not all bad. Usually when we hear that phrase, we think that it's all negative.
Right.
In this case, he wanted to highlight that meeting so that he could say, we can also try to emulate it so we can repeat history in a good way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. It's a good thing to hope for. And stay tuned, there's much more Currents coming up straight ahead. When we return, brought together after 40 years, 4 decades, a brother and a sister meet for the first time.
Finally, on the first day of Respect Life Month today, you've heard about pro-life activities, but we also wanted to tell you about something that may not get as much attention.
Well, we're talking about the adoption option, and for one South Carolina woman who comes from what she says is a strong Catholic family that led to a poignant meeting with a brother she never knew. Reporter Cleve Bryan has more.
I'm very excited. My heart's racing.
Danielle Carroll is full of nervous anticipation.
Pacing. Lots of it.
She's eagerly waiting at the Charleston airport for her brother.
That's all it is nervous energy. I just can't wait for him to get here.
While waiting for a loved one may seem like forever for most people, Danielle's been waiting 40 years.
My mom was young, and she had me and then had my brother afterwards. Strong Catholic family in San Francisco. He was placed up for adoption.
It wasn't until this year, when her mother passed away, that she found out she has a brother.
My stepdad gave me a photo album with 2 black and white pictures and told me this was my brother, Tony.
A complete shock to Danielle.
It hurt. And some of my relatives did not want me to search. I guess they wanted me just to leave it alone.
But she knew she couldn't do that.
Because I felt like there was a part of me that was missing, and I had to find a part of my family.
Sorting through a maze of family questioning and gathering records from various agencies, finally in August she got a letter with the names of Tony's foster parents.
And within less than 48 hours, I had my first text from him.
Since then, she's spoken to Tony Vickers and his family in San Diego through Facebook, text messages, and online video services, a testimony to the power of technology.
It's incredible. I wouldn't have been able to do it without it.
But meeting in person is what Danielle's really been waiting for.
I can't believe the plane's late. I've been waiting this long, and I'm not very patient.
What are you going to say to him when you see him?
I don't know. Probably just give him a hug, cry.
And after waiting and waiting, the moment arrived.
Hey, how are you?
It was a whole family reunion.
This is Andrew. Say hi, Andrew. This is Karen.
For Tony, meeting Danielle is a strange sensation.
It feels wonderful is what it feels like. There's always that piece of you that seems that you always wonder, and I never really knew.
It's incredible. I mean, thinking that I was an only child my whole life, it's amazing to know that there is somebody out there. I just wish I knew. I could have found out a long time ago.
Now Tony and Danielle are making up for 40 years of lost time.
Cleve Bryan reporting, and also worth mentioning there that Danielle enlisted the help, though, of Catholic Charities in her search for her brothers. So definitely a great story there. Actually, a couple of my cousins on one side of the family are both adopted. The only son and only daughter of a couple of my other cousins are both adopted. And I remember them talking about that when I was growing up and kind of understanding it and not really, and that they had other family and things like that. But I know that from their stories that they are both so grateful to have been adopted and to have been adopted by such wonderful parents, which my cousins are.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends that have been adopted as well, and I think that they go through different stages. At some points, they feel like they were not wanted, and so they, feel upset. But then at the same time, also feel grateful and very happy that someone did choose to raise them and to love them as deeply as they did. So it is Respect Life Month, and those are some folks that did in fact respect life. So. Well, that is all for this edition of Currents. This weekend, as we have mentioned, it is a special weekend for a few different reasons. We already mentioned Respect Life Sunday and the Feast of St. Francis and the Blessing of the Animals.
Right. Well, it's also the 6th anniversary of Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio's installation as head of the Brooklyn Diocese. Well, tomorrow he'll be here in our studio for a look back and also a look ahead.
Very nice. And you'll be talking to him.
That's right.
We have that, and we have much more on tomorrow's edition of Currents. Until then, be sure to check us out online. Head over to currentsny.net, and you can see clips of the show there and check out our blog, Riding the Wave.
And you can also send us an email. Let us know what you think about the show. Share a story idea with us as well. We always need those. Absolutely. Our address is drop us a line, all one word, at currentsny.net. Well, for all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great night.